This is a D6 generation pip. Yeah, one of those dots on the side of a six-sided die. Yeah, a pip. You know, a short pip. Little something. Yeah, about anything gaming related. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ. We'll see what's coming up today.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another pip. This time around it is just me and I'm trying something new again. So you may remember last month I did a pip whilst driving in the car. That time I was using the car's microphone to record some things. And what happened there was I got feedback from all of you that it was listenable, but just barely. And so basically the subtext was, please don't do that again. So I did. So this time, I am in my car again. Again, driving safely. I have both hands on the wheel. My eyes are front. My phone is not even visible to me. It's on my seat to my right. Everything's fine. The tricky bit now, though, is I think that might be better, make it a little better, is that I am now got a lavalier mic, which should mean that we shouldn't have any better audio. Let's see. I did some tests. It sounds a lot better than the car mic. So you guys tell me when this is all said and done, what you think. So on today's pip, I really wanted to talk a bit about, Joan of Arc. Legends of Time, I think it's called. I can never remember the subtitle. But basically it's the new Joan of Arc board/miniature game from our friends at Mythic Games. Now this is a Kickstarter that Craig and I both got excited about I want to say 2 years ago, or was it 3? I can't remember. 2 or 3 years ago at Gen Con, Craig and I saw it, and we were blown away by this board game, and so we both immediately backed it. I backed it at a pretty high level. Craig backed it, I think, at maximum level, so Craig got a few extra things. And this just arrived last week at my house, and Craig just got his last night. Now, he has not a chance to play it. He's been very busy lately, which is why we've had a couple of episodes where we've been solo here. But I've been playing it all weekend with my daughter, my youngest daughter, who is 15. And I've gone through 4 games now. We just played it again last night and we are loving it. And so I wanted to share, some of my and some of her, although she's not here, but I'm certainly happy to, speak a little bit on her behalf, thoughts of the game. Now, one thing too, if you want to hear all about the unboxing and all that stuff that came in my Kickstarter backing level, that was in a lost chapter, yes. So if this driving while recording thing works, I can create a lot more content. So I'm going to keep experimenting with different ways to record while driving until I get somewhere to good audio that you guys enjoy listening to. So we'll keep iterating on that. But if I can keep generating this kind of content, it means that not only will you have a couple episodes a month, but also hopefully we can get some lost chapter content back there, because we really think it's important to say thank you to all you guys who are supporting us on Patreon. So I really do appreciate that. So if you are a patron or you'd like to be one, jump over to Patreon, become a patron. And if you already are, no problem. Click on the lost chapter about the unboxing of Joan of Arc, and I'll describe what comes in the box, all the models. It's really a lot of cool stuff. So I got this game, and it was a typical, from my kids' point of view, it was, oh look, Dad's got another giant game that's going to take 16 hours to play and 4 days to learn the rules, and we'll never master it, and we'll play it once and we'll take all day. So check, please, I'm out. Normally, what happens? So Saturday morning, I'm up and I'm combing through all the bits. And as I mentioned on the, the lost chapter, the bits are incredible, and that's what got my daughter interested. So I'm going through the box and I'm sorting all the models, and I'm trying to figure out. And this is really in preparation for my normal Tuesday game with Craig. So I'm thinking, well, Saturday morning, it's quiet in the house. I'm going to sort all my models. And so I'm going through this and sorting all the guys. And one of the interesting things about Joan of Arc is most of the units are on little bases. And it's 15 millimeter, I think, as I mentioned in the unboxing video. And so the guys are small. And most of the units are essentially represented by groups of 3 models on a little round base. And the little round base has countersunk holes that are just circles that are just deep enough to hold the bases of the little singleton models, and you stick them in the bases. Now, one of the things I will say about Joan of Arc that is a little bit of a ding against it, at least if you backed it at the level I did, is that you have more unit models than you have bases. So the expectation, I think, from the designers is you swap the models out from the bases depending on the scenario you're going to play, which is actually not a bad idea. So, for example, cavalry models have bases with 2 countersunk circles, and the 2 models go on each circle, and that's fine. But there are some scenarios with lots of wolves, and those kind of look like cavalry models. You put 2 models on a base. And there are some scenarios full of cavalry. And the thing is, if you were to glue all your cavalry models in the bases, you wouldn't be able to swap them out for wolves because there's not enough bases to base all the wolves and all the cavalry, for example. The same is true with the infantry as well. There's simply not enough bases to support all the options. So the game is designed in such a way that you leave all your infantry somehow stored in little piles or little bins, and you sort them out and put them into their bases depending on the scenario you're going to play. And so I'm learning all this, right? Because I'm figuring it out. I'm trying to decide, am I going to magnetize them? Am I going to just let them all, sit in their base? Am I going to try to buy more bases or make my own so I can have them all pre-based so it's easier to pick up and play? So I'm thinking all through these things and sorting it all for Monday's game. And my youngest daughter walks in and she goes, wow, that looks cool, because I got like the giant hexes out, which basically form the board you play on. I got the trees out. I got one of the giant creatures out there, which looks like a multi-headed hydra dragon bird situation. It's huge. And so she's going, wow, this looks really, really cool. Can we try this game out? And I'm like, oh, excellent. She actually wants to try the game. This is fantastic. Good lead-in, good call, Mythic Games. And so I'm like, yeah, sure. I said, actually, I'm just working on the introductory scenario for Monday. If you want to try that out with me, we can. So I'm about to learn the rules. And I've said the introductory scenario has all these guys in it. And it's got like, I think 4 bases of cavalry, 1 little hero for one side. And then on the other side, it's got a couple of archer units, a couple of peasant units. I can't remember exactly, but, a few 4 or 5 units per side in a scenario where there's some civilians starving and one side's trying to rescue them. Right? Pretty simple, but look cool. Looking at some interesting rules. And then she said, does that have, and she's looking through some of the models that I've got lying out to, does that have the vampire in it? No, no vampire in this one. It's just some guys rescuing some. Oh, okay. Well, does it have the werewolf in it? No, it doesn't have the werewolf in it because, it's just the regular. Well, does it have that dragon over there? No, it doesn't. And that's when she says, Dad, that scenario doesn't look very fun. Intro scenarios are for the weak. Let's play a real scenario with the cool stuff. I'm like, wow, okay. You sure? Because, it's going to be a lot of, I don't want you to be, like, overwhelmed by the rules and be like, man, this sucks, And she's like, no, I want it. It won't be cool to me if it doesn't have everything in it, so let's try this. I'm okay, so I start looking through the scenarios. And as I mentioned, there are many, many, many scenarios, all of them very interesting, very in-depth, and very unique. So one of the scenarios, how the scenarios are organized is there's a scenario booklet. I don't know, it's like 35-page scenario booklet in the core game, and then each and every expansion box has more scenarios in it that highlight the creatures and units that are included in the expansion. So I have like I have basically the Requilary, the main core game, and then the super, you supported us on Kickstarter, here's a bunch of exclusive box. So I have a lot of scenarios to choose from. So I'm flipping through the scenarios. Now in the scenarios in the upper left-hand corner, there is 2 little indicators inside of a little shield shape. The first indicator tells you the number of players. So most scenarios are 2 players, but there is a solo play scenario, and there's also quite a few scenarios, a surprising number actually, I was very pleased to see, 4 or 5 or 6, that are 3 or even 4 player scenarios, which is really cool. And below that, for a player count, there's a number of stars that indicate sort of the complexity of the scenario. Basically, if it's a 3-star one, it's pretty much got everything under the sun involved in it, all the different mechanics of the game, plus a lot of semi-complex scenario rules. And these scenarios are complicated, right? So like, even the simplest scenarios are a 2-page affair, describing in the booklet. Many, many scenarios are 3 pages, and some are 4 pages of rules. And they're not overwhelmingly complicated. In fact, you can understand the scenario and the objectives even without understanding the core game rules. So you can read the scenario and go, aha, I know what I'm trying to do here. But every scenario is very different, involving unique models and unique tokens and unique situations that are just for that scenario. It reminds me very much of either Descent or and I don't mean how you play, but in the complexity of the scenario style, either like Descent feeling maybe, or even Betrayal in the House on the Hill, where every end game is completely different with its own little set of mini rules that happen. So it's got that going on there, which I think is cool, but it does mean that each scenario you play is like learning a little sub-game every time you play it. So we're looking through these scenarios, and I'm like, well, we definitely want to stay away from the 3-star scenarios in the very first time. And there doesn't seem to be any 1-star scenarios with supernatural elements. Now, another thing about the Joan of Arc game here is that there's sort of scenarios that are almost entirely historical. So if you're more of a historical gamer, you got that option for you. But then there's also many, many scenarios with supernatural forces involved. There's like a holy order and an unholy order, which basically unholy order's got vampires, werewolves, demons, and the holy order's got things like angels and other cool stuff. So you can go either, there's a genie running around there, you can go either way on that, or somewhere in the middle. But obviously my daughter wanted to play something a little supernatural. She's a big fan of high fantasy, Dungeons & Dragons, so we're going through looking for something like that. And I did find one that looked relatively under control. The other thing I was looking for was, can I get away with not assembling a million little bases of dudes? And so I found a scenario that was a 2-starer, and so that seemed like not too bad. And it was 2-star with a reasonable number of units, and it was this scenario for hunting for a werewolf. So the premise of this one is small village, been infested by a werewolf, and a hero mounted on horseback by himself with a very small number of units in support is coming into town to hunt down the werewolf with the help of a sort of I can't remember if it's a priest or a bishop that's there to help out search for this werewolf. So these guys are coming into town. Looks like a pretty good gig. Looks like an interesting one. Meanwhile, what I was a little nervous about was on the werewolf side, most of the werewolf stuff doesn't start on the table. There's a bunch of villagers on the table and some buildings, and there's a bunch of tokens that are question marks, and what's going to happen is you're going to flip these guys over, and you're going to discover, is it a pack of wolves? Is it some villagers? Are the villagers good or bad? That kind of thing. And so my daughter's setting all this. I'm thinking, okay, we'll try this out. Not too many models to assemble. And she's going through and she's reading the rules in the scenario, and I'm ready for her to be like, too complex amount. And she's like digging it. She's getting into it more. And she's like, oh, cool. Okay, I got to figure out where some of these things go. And so she's setting up the werewolf side of the situation while I'm getting all the bases ready. And so we got it all set up, and we started to play, and I'm learning the basic rules. And the basic rules are really surprisingly simple. That was the other thing I was a little nervous about, because I hadn't really had a chance to fully digest the basic rules yet. We had spent so much time discussing the models and getting things ready, and she was looking through the scenario book. I had, the first night the game arrived, I had read through the rule book once, 35-page rule book, a lot of pictures, it's not that much heavy reading. I read through that once, and I had watched one video online of the guys at Mythic Games playing. I think I watched 20 minutes of them playing one of the games. So I knew enough to be dangerous, but I had never played it before, and I hadn't really digested the rules. And it had even been a couple days since I read the rule book, and several weeks since I'd watched the video, so none of this was fresh. So I'm just telling you all this because, just to give you sort of the framework of where I was at the moment. So there we are. We got everything set up. She's digested the scenario, and I'm like, well, let's just do this thing. So I'm like, okay, everything's set up. We got all the tiles laid out, and each scenario tells you which tiles to put down. It's got a nice little diagram to help you find the right tiles, because there's these giant hex tiles that you lay down. Some of them are pre-stuck together in 3 like giant hexes. Some of them are single hexes. Some of them are doubles. You lay them all out. You put the buildings and the trees and the shrubbery on there. What's interesting about the game is there are unit size limit for the hexes, and the hexes are divided up into sub areas, which are where your models can stand, right? So some hexes are like a giant big area, which can hold up to 8 models, and other hexes are divided into 3 little mini areas, and these only hold, I think, 4. And then there's some hexes that are divided in half that don't hold 6. But the reason I bring that up is, if there's any plastic in that area at all, whether it's a building or a shrub or a tree, and there's plastic for all the terrain and everything, even maybe a little well model that shows there's a well there, those consume space. So they take less space to move around on the board. Now, I wanted to share this with you earlier because my daughter and I didn't figure that out the first time we played the game. We only figured it out later, because there's some spaces with shrubs on them that don't seem to have any in-game effect. Like trees actually deal with line of sight, and other things give you better saving throws. Shrubs don't seem to do anything. What they are is they're space consumers. So they make it so that certain spots on the board can hold less, can only hold smaller groups of forces. So That was pretty neat. So we got all that set up. Board's looking awesome. It's already popping with cool buildings on it. The scenarios also tell you where to deploy all your guys, so there's no decision making when you're setting up about where should I best put my guys. And so Kit does all that. And so what she's trying to do, we figured out the premise, she's trying to slow me down as long as possible because there's a timer on the game. So if after 5, I think it's 6 turns, and turns are easy to count in this game, so there's this deck of cards that you're going to flip over that are going to tell how many actions each side is going to get for that round. And actions in Joan of Arc are all done with cubes. And so what you do in the beginning of a turn is you're going to flip over one card, and that card's going to have icons on it to tell how many basically gray actions, the most basic action type in the game, each player is going to get. So you flip this card over, you get 3 actions, you put them on each side of your board. We're ready to go. So that was easy to figure out. Then you flip over these War Council cards, and they call it the River. Think of it like Texas Hold'em. You flip 3 of them over, and these give you 3 sort of little options you can choose from, and you get to pick one of these cards. So one of them might be to get a charge order also, which instead of being the boring gray cube, which is a basic order, you get a green cube, and the charge cube lets you actually do a charge action with units that have the charge keyword. Basically all that means is that if you got cavalry, pretty much always it's cavalry, if you got cavalry, you can move them 2 squares and they get to attack with the same action. Normally with an action you can either attack from the hex you're in to an adjacent area, or you can move. You can't do both. But charge, if you have a unit that has a charge stat, lets you do both. See, pretty simple. And the other kind of actions, one lets you interrupt, and one lets you activate a same unit twice. So the game's got a mechanic where when you go to activate a unit, you put the cube you're going to activate in the area that the unit is, and then everybody in that area gets to activate, kind of a la the old Game of Thrones board game from Fantasy Flight. You activate everybody in that space, right? And you can't put a cube in a space twice. So once you've activated an area on a hex, you can't activate it again. But there is a cool order called reactivate that lets you break that rule. So that's pretty cool too. So basically the river is going to let you do some of those things. River also gives you other opportunities for resources, like getting XP or legend points. It also allows you to destroy one of your opponent's activations before they even get to go. So all kinds of cool stuff on the river. But basically, that's the beginning of the turn. You flip one of these cards over, it tells you how many actions everybody's going to get. You flip the river, and each player gets a choice of some cool thing. Note, you both can choose the same thing. So you're not really stealing one of the choices from your opponent, but player 1 has to choose first, which does telegraph to player 2 which choice they're making and might affect the choice you want to make. So that rule seemed pretty simple. We were like, well, all about that. And then what you do is player 1 is going to spend all of his or her action cubes, putting them on the board one at a time and doing the actions with the areas, activating the areas they put the cubes in. And once player 1 has completed all their actions, all of their cubes are removed from the board, they're done, and then player 2 goes. And the only nuance to this is you have this cool little game board in front of you where you can put cubes in this little reserve area if you decide you want to hold them for next turn. So that's pretty simple. So that's really simple. So that was easy to teach. And then the actions are super simple. You can either attack from your square to an adjacent hex. If you have range attacks, you can shoot, or you can move your dudes. That's the great thing, and that's pretty simple. But the big thing to remember is when you move your guys, you move them all. So I'm not going to get into a full review here. I really want to Mark talk about the thing, but I'm just sharing how easy it was to learn the game. So, and what was kind of cool about this scenario as a learning scenario was because neither of us, I had my guys, and I was playing the guys hunting for the werewolf, because my guys had all their guys starting on the board at once. I just was moving them around, but there wasn't an enemy army to fight initially. I was going to go investigate these tokens. So initially, it was actually a pretty good introductory scenario, because initially all I was doing was activating and moving, trying to get closer to these tokens so I could start investigating them and seeing where the werewolf was. And my daughter didn't have a lot of stuff to activate either. She just had a few of these models on the table that were kind of milling about, but mostly she was waiting for me to start activating tokens and then do things. So she was kind of like able to learn and absorb and watch how it worked. And just to the highlights of this game, so we started playing it and really started getting into it. I'm like, okay, let's see what's under this thing. And I flip it over, and it's a peasant. Now, when the peasants are immediately revealed, my daughter has a couple of choices. She can, if she has a legend coin, and now these are all scenario rules now, so this is all about this one specific scenario. So there's these different resources in the game, and one of them, the scenarios, is this thing called a legend coin, or legend token. And you get legend tokens, mostly from flips on the river, from those cards, but there's also other characters in the game that generate them. And now, at the start of the game, because the werewolf basically owns a town, all these NPCs that are normally characters in most scenarios that are standing around unused, you go up to them, you have a conversation, which is a game mechanic, Hopefully they join your side, you get their card, and their card gives you an ongoing bonus until you stop them. But in this werewolf game, all the civilians are under the werewolf's control. So while the werewolf doesn't have a lot of units on the table, all these civilians are generating their bonus features on the werewolf. So time is totally the enemy of the werewolf hunter. One, if the game ends and he hasn't killed the werewolf, he loses. And two, the werewolf side is all these civilians are generating resources. So one of the civilians is generating legend. So the werewolf's already starting the game with some legend points. And so I come in, I flip one of these tokens over, peasants. Now, the cool thing about peasants is there's a little deck of cards just for this werewolf scenario. This is how detailed this Kickstarter game is. And so when you flip over peasants, you flip over one of these little cards, and it's some information the werewolf hunters learn. So I learned, well, this one said, I don't know nothing, and so I didn't learn anything on the first card. So I learned nothing. And when the civilians are flipped over, a couple things can happen. Either the werewolf player can play a legend to make the civilians basically unholy, and the peasants are on his side. And then they go to an adjacent square, because one of the core mechanics of Joan of Arc is really, very rarely are there ever units of different army types in the same area. You usually fight adjacent areas. You never really co-occupy an area. You fight adjacent areas, you kill all the enemies or push them out, and then you move in, basically how it works. So if she decided to make it unholy, which she did, the civilians then pop to the left, right? So this is how it's proceeding. So I'm interviewing these civilians. Some of them she's making unholy. Some of the tiles I'm turning over turn out to be a pack of wolves, which are already on her side, clearly under control of the werewolf. So I've got to deal with those. There's a bone caster in the corner who's basically like a witch. Well, initially just like a soothsayer. So there's a soothsayer over by the well. I'm trying to get to him to interrogate him, but during my daughter's turn, she was able, and these are all rules in this one scenario, she was able to get one of her civilians inside the church, activate the evil altar, again, all the scenario, and convert the soothsayer to an evil witch, which starts generating more things for her side and no longer someone I can go interact with and do some good for. So I feel like I got to go kill that thing. Then some of these wolves are popping up, so I'm dealing with those. And so it's going along. We're having small skirmish battles. It actually turns out to be a very good interest scenario. As I'm interviewing and talking to peasants, I find out that in the ruins on the board, which is a space over in the corner with a cool resin ruin model, there is a holy cross, which if I get that, my bishop does much more damage in combat. So I'm off to get that, and the bishop also has a special rule in this scenario that allows him to exercise peasants and turn them to the side of good, and that flips their base. So another cool thing about the Joan of Arc game is all the different unit types aren't pre-made for different armies or different factions. Instead, what happens is there's these little base covers that go on for different colors in the game, and there's 4 different piles of these base covers for up to 4 different factions being involved in a different given battle. So we were using black base covers for the unholy side, the werewolf side, and white base covers for the good side. And so what happened is when these peasants would show up, and my daughter would, use an legend point to make them unholy, they'd get a black base on them, they'd start running on the table under her control. If my bishop could get near them, which he did near the ones that were on in the ruins, he exorcised them, turned them to the forces of good, was able to recover the cross that one of the peasants had told us was there, and so now he's got the holy cross, which gives him an extra red die in combat, which is the best combat die. So now, against unholy units, which is pretty much all these guys. So now I'm like feeling pretty good about this. Meanwhile, so what it turns out is that, remember I mentioned my daughter's controlling all these main villagers, like the blacksmith and the apothecary and all these guys. So they all have also little question mark tokens on them, which is indicating which of the one of them might actually be the werewolf. So one of those villagers is the werewolf, and she's moving them around. So I'm trying to intuit, based on the villagers I've been able to determine with my priest aren't werewolves, so I can flip over their tokens and they're clean. Or I'm trying to find the one that is the werewolf, either by actually interrogating it with my bishop and figuring out he was there. And so I'm role-playing like he's asking them to recite the Lord's Prayer, prove you're not a werewolf, right? And my daughter thinks this is hilarious because she just studied this in world history. So she's like, that's hilarious, I really did it. I'm like, I know, so that's what I'm doing to you. So she's like, so we're doing all that. Meanwhile, she's starting to move the blacksmith sort of out of town and into the woods. I'm like, that's pretty suspicious. And all the wolves are starting to gather around the blacksmith, and I'm like, that's pretty suspicious. I feel like the blacksmith might be the werewolf, just a hunch. But I can't get there because she's kind of blocking them out. Meanwhile, the other thing that's cool is I can just start outright slaying the civilians. I can just kill them. But the problem is if I kill a civilian, if I've killed a civilian that's not a werewolf, either that I knew was not a werewolf, but I killed him anyway because I was annoying, or if I think, let's say I think the blacksmith's the werewolf, so I go to kill him before he's been proven to be the werewolf, we flip this coin over. If he is the werewolf, he basically turns into the werewolf, and the werewolf's on the table. When I try to kill him, he's like, I'm a werewolf! Or he's not the werewolf, in which case I've killed an innocent, and the cool game mechanic, one of those turn cards, the cards that you flip over for each turn to see what the starting action is removed from the unused deck. So the game gets shorter. And the problem is if the game runs out of turns, I lose. So I am absolutely not killing any civilians that I'm not sure are the werewolf. Great mechanic. So you can do it. It's like an RPG. You can do whatever you want, but there's consequences for everything. I really like this scenario. So this is just like one of 20 scenarios. It's a crazy number. So I'm like, okay. So I'm figuring out the blacksmith. I'm starting to remove it. Finally, I'm like, time is starting to run out. I got to go get the blacksmith. And the blacksmith happened to get a little too close to the ruins where the priest is hanging out with his holy symbol. So I'm like, I got this. Meanwhile, while this is all happening, my main hero, the mounted hero on the horse, is also interrogating civilians on the other side of the city. Now, the cool part is when the priest interrogates a civilian, it's automatic. He always knows immediately if he's the werewolf or not. But when my hero interrogates him, he's trying to remember the exact phrasing of the Lord's Prayer. He's not really got it all down. So over there, he can screw up. He has to make a die roll to see if he actively figures out if my daughter has to reveal the thing or not. So he's on the other side of the city. He's kind of alone. He's got one unit with him, not really well defended, but I'm thinking, no problem. It's a bunch of villagers. And meanwhile, over here on the other side of the table is the priest. So the priest gets to the blacksmith, and I'm like, I'm going to risk it. I'm running out of time. He attacks the blacksmith with everything he's got. He slays the blacksmith easily, and the blacksmith is the werewolf and reveals as the werewolf. When the werewolf is revealed, he reveals the werewolf, and I'm like, I've got him. That's the end of my turn. Now, my daughter's turn, she levels the werewolf up. So that's a mechanic in the game. If you have enough XP, and she's been saving XP, and you get XP for a variety of things, killing dudes, there's cards on the river that do it. If you've got enough XP, you can level a character up, and you flip their card over, and they become cooler. So she levels the werewolf up, which makes him cooler, but also the werewolf has a rule that when he levels up, he immediately summons wolves to his spot. So now the werewolf's got wolves. Now, meanwhile, there are other wolves around the table, and my daughter figures out that the wolves all have haste 2. So what that means is most models, when you move them, only move one square, but the wolves have haste 2, they move twice. So in one turn, she's able to basically summon all the wolves to her, and I've got one chance to kill this werewolf before she gets all the summoning done. So my priest goes at it one more time on the werewolf. With everything he's got, the werewolf gets away with 1 wound. And then in her turn, she takes the werewolf, groups up with all the wolves you can muster, like 5, and they run away from the priest and go after my hero on his horse in the middle of town. Now, this was a brilliant move because it turns out that for her to win, she has to survive to the end of the game, as I mentioned, or if she can kill the hero, not the priest, but the hero, she wins. And my hero was so busy trying to spread out and interrogate as many people as possible, he only had 1 unit with him. He went by himself, not really well defended. So the werewolf comes running up with this pack of wolves on the priest, and you can imagine there was actually one villager in one of the buildings, and my daughter and I imagine him like peeking out the window watching what's happening, and the priest is like, "No, foul creature, don't run from me! Face the Lord's wrath!" And he goes running over, and sure enough, Kit rolls great. My daughter rolls really, really well, and slays my hero, winning the game. It was awesome. Great story. There were so many cool moments. I love the idea of the priest interrogating the people and finding out where the cross was, and converting them, and trying to figure out. It was just a really cool mechanic, and she and I both played it, and we're like, wow, that was awesome. I could totally play that again, the exact same scenario, and reset it, but there was another scenario that was calling to us. So it was fantastic. I would play it again in a heartbeat. In fact, that was still one of her favorite scenarios. We've played 3 different scenarios now, 4 games total, 3 different scenarios, and I love that scenario. In fact, every scenario has been really, really compelling. And it's not like the kind of scenario you play it once and you're like, I'm done with that now. There's so many things going on. It can be done differently. And once you know the nuances of the scenario, it's the kind of thing, if you play it more, it becomes more compelling and more interesting. So the werewolf scenario, very cool. A pretty good introductory scenario. I think I'd still recommend if you're not a hardcore gamer like this, you do want to start with their introductory scenario. Is probably the right choice, which has no supernatural in it. But it wasn't that bad, and we really, really liked it, and it worked for us, and she was hooked. So the next scenario we wanted to try. So then we're like, Okay, now we're going to plaid. So there's another scenario that we couldn't resist trying, which uses the largest model that I got. Now, there is a backing level that Craig backed, which includes a dragon that is the biggest model they've done for this Joan of Arc game so far, and it's massive. But I got the level I had this model called the Beast, which is sort of like a eagle-taloned dragon creature with multiple heads. So kind of think of a Hydra with tail, giant wings, and this thing is huge. It's the size of, it's bigger than most Games Workshop Greater Demons. And remember, this is 15 millimeter. So this thing is giant, and this is not as big as their dragon. So some of the miniatures in this game are nuts. So we wanted to try with this giant miniature, and the premise of this mission is that there is a pregnant virgin trying to give birth to the Savior, and so she's trying to make it to one of the buildings on the board to give birth and then escape. And she's being escorted by some troops, some conventional military, along with angels. So there's several angel units, and angel models are off the charts awesome. They are fantastic, and their stats are also fantastic. So they look great. But the bad news for the good guys trying to do this is that the bad guys have the Beast, this massive model that takes up an entire hex. It's huge, so it's just sitting there on an entire hex. It also, on his side, flying demons, demons on the ground. They're called voracious demons, so several different demon units, along with more wolves. So it's handy to have the wolves built from the last scenario. Wolves are running around. So all kinds of badness happening. And some undead skeletons, too. Why not? So forces of darkness are everywhere. And so we're coming at this. So this is going to be interesting. Oh, and because there are models in this game that can fly, so the giant beast can fly, the angels can fly, that means you got to put a sky board down. So there's these other hexes that are blue sky, and they go off to the side of the board, and that allows some of your models that can fly to fly high, which means they can basically fly up and then fly down and land anywhere else on the board. It takes them 2 actions, though, or sometimes more. But also, whilst in the sky, if they've got range attacks, they can shoot them pretty much anywhere on the board, but anyone on the board with range attacks can shoot up at them. So it's kind of risky, but it's a great way to get around the table and dominate. So really cool scenario, and I think in a future, well, I'll just give a quick summary of that one, and then maybe next time we'll do. But just some, at a really high level, what happened in this game was super fun to watch. Kit decided this time we rolled for it. She was playing the forces of good, so she was trying to get the woman to a building. And what's interesting about this game is, this scenario is, and again, I think this highlights the difference in the scenario. So I'm not really getting into the mechanics of the game. I'm sure Craig and I will do that at a joint PIP later this month, and really dive into the core of the game and how it works and how morale and everything else works and all that comes together. But I'm just kind of giving you the feeling for these scenario rules, and this is a completely different scenario. So in this scenario, there's tokens for the virgin who's trying to get to the building, and there's 2 of them. So the bad guys, there's a fake, right? So the bad guys don't know which is the actual virgin. There's 2 of them, but they have this divine protection, which basically means normal attacks won't work on them, and the bad guys have to either use the beast or again those legend points to power unholy attacks against them. So they have a limited number of those they can do, which is really kind of interesting. And you've got to guess which one it is. So I am trying to get there. So I fly my beast high, it then flies down low, attacks one of the ladies, destroys their divine protection. So I'm really picking on one of them. The other one makes a beeline for the buildings. There's buildings on either end of the table. So she goes with one of the ladies, goes to the left, other one goes to the right. I come down from the sky, smite the one on the right, knock its divine protection down, and so I'm thinking, I've got this. I've knocked her divine protection down. I'm going to kill her. She's closer to the building. The one on the left will never make it. And then Kit is reading all the rules quietly in the corner, all like, oh, ho, ho, I have you. And she's like, oh no, divine protection's down. What's going to happen? She grabs one of the angels who's nearby with this divine protection is dropped, and literally like the woman's just sitting there with like nothing covering her from any of my bad guys, and I'm about to go and kill her. She's got her last turn before I can definitely slay the one, and then what that'll happen is it'll make the other one, the non-decoy, be the non-decoy, and that's good for her because she's still in the game, but it's bad for her because that one's out of position. So she grabs the angel flies over. Angels will carry, and the rules in the scenario is while Divine's protection's up, the angels can't carry the Virgin. But as soon as divine protection drops, the angels can carry the Virgin. So she grabs the angel grabs the Virgin and flies her high, and then she spends another action to fly her down to one of the buildings, and then puts her in the building. I'm like, oh my, she was teleported across the table basically. So the fluff of that was so cool. Like, the beast is, it destroys God's divine protection. The Virgin's sitting there cowering, and an angel swoops in, flies high, and gets her to the building before the enemies know what happened. It was awesome. So my response was, so now what happens in this scenario is the baby's been born. It's teleported to safety somehow, magically, because, holy magic. But now the Virgin has to get off the board. So she's got to leave the building, run back across the table, and get to these. There's 2 points on the board that are marked with little angel wing token. That if she can make it to either one of those and spend an action, she flies away to safety. So I'm looking at this now like, well, crap. So now I got to stop her from getting off the board. So I can't let the angels just grab her and fly high again. That was unacceptable. So I take my flying demons and I put them both in the sky on different sky hexes. So basically what that means is there's only 2 sky hexes in this scenario. So because I've got a demon in each one, you can't fly through a hex or an area that has any models in it. You just can't enter it. So basically I've got air superiority now. My flying demons are filling the skies. This is my mind, this is what's happening. Are filling the skies, and the angels are getting the ground. Now there's answers to that. They can attack them with range attacks. They can blow them out of the sky or whatever. But the second thing I do, and my daughter's face when I did this was awesome. She had left the one hex, which has the one angel wings on it, on the top of the board, empty. And so and there was a clear path from where the beast was. Remember, a giant model that takes up an entire hex and covers all the areas? She had the clear path from where the beast was to that hex. So the beast, after my demons flew high and filled the skies, the beast runs across the table, spending several actions, and covers one of the exits completely. So the only way you can get out that way is to slay the beast, which is probably not going to happen in the time remaining because the beast is huge, massive number of hit points, very unlikely to happen. I couldn't see it happening. And her face just, wait, that's legal? She's looking through the book. Oh crap, it's totally legal. So the beast is blocking this out. At this point, she's feeling like, I've got this. And she's like, man, that was a good move, Dad. I don't know what to do. Now the other exit is there on the other side of the board. But it is chock. It's where my spawn point is. My reinforcements come in there. So it is chock full of stuff. I've got like, I don't know, 4 wolves down there, more skeletons that you can shake a stick at. Now my powerful flying demons, they're not there anymore because they are, they're flying high and defending. But I've got some other guys down there. So she decides, okay, I've got one hope, and she's not going to go through the beast because he's looking way too powerful. So she bands her forces together, escorts the Virgin, and comes with everything, all the wrath of the angels and everything, straight towards that one corner. And somehow she does it. The angels are machines in combat. She cuts through all my troops, wipes them out, and by the last move before I can reinforce the thing, gets the Virgin on there and gets her out with like 1 turn to spare. It was an awesome end. Great story, great moments. And we love that scenario so much that we turned right around and left it set up on, and the very next day after school played it again and just switched sides. And the funny part about that was we were kind of like, well, it looks pretty hard for the forces of darkness, but of course she won with the forces of darkness in the replay scenario. It was also awesome. I was doing some really cool stuff with orders, but I thought I had her again. I was going to escape, but she caught me on the ground, and she used fire better. So the beast, when the beast attacks, with range attacks, it starts the game with 2 fire tokens and basically can breathe fire twice and it'll be fire in a hex. I didn't even use the fire. I was too busy moving them around trying to block the exit. She used the fire to block my paths in very creative ways and really blocked me out. So again, it was a totally different game even though it's the same scenario. So what's really interesting about this game is it's a bunch of, these scenarios are so different. It's a bunch of mini games. So you basically got like 10 different miniature games in a box with different stories and different adventures, but the same core mechanics every time. Really impressed. Had a great time. And so now our plan is, now we want to play this massive 3-player scenario, which we actually played the first time last night, where this one is Dracula is involved. Dracula's in a town. There's actually 4 factions in the game. There's Dracula's brother's faction, who wants Dracula dead. There is these Ottoman Empire guys who are all super Turkish looking and cool. and they've got a genie and a magic carpet, and they're coming in to basically enslave the populace, Vlad's village, and not really worrying about Vlad too much. And Vlad, Dracula has got himself, all of his wolves. He's actually, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like Castlevania going on here. He's a bad guy. He's definitely, drinking the blood of villagers, but he kind of wants to defend his villagers because that's his food source. So he doesn't really want the Ottomans to come in there and enslave all his people. And also, he doesn't really want his brother, but he doesn't care about his brother too much, but his brother just wants him dead. So basically, everybody's got a different objective. So we're looking forward to trying that. My youngest daughter and I tried it last night quickly in a 2-player scenario. And what's cool about all the scenarios that are multiplayer is they have rules for playing with 2 players, just who controls what, playing with 3 players, and playing with 4 players. So we're going to introduce my daughter tonight. We're going to try it with her. And the plan is we're just going to go right to this massive 3-player scenario with all the complexity and Dracula. We'll see what she thinks. But she's also pretty much intro scenarios for the week. And the funny thing about this is it is using everything I have. It's literally all the tiles in the game are in it. All the terrain is in it. There's more models involved, and they're all little colored bases, and bases, so we're kind of fudging some things because basically it's like a maxed out use everything you own. And it's fantastic. And she and I had a great time playing it last night. I'll do the battle report on that one in the future. Maybe I'll share the 3-player one, but I'm looking forward to sharing it with my oldest daughter this evening. So anyway, that's the PIP. That's hopefully enough to give you a taste for what some of these scenarios feel like. And as I mentioned, Craig's got his stuff just came in the mail yesterday. He's all excited. I'm sure he'll get a play or 2 in. And hopefully by the end of the month here, we can get a PIP with the 2 of us together talking about the mechanics and our feelings on the game in general. Obviously, I'm already a fan, but we'd love to share more with you. But yeah, you see this thing running around, definitely take a look at it. If one of your friends backed it, I would say take the time to play the game with them. I think you're going to like it. That's Joan of Arc. That's it for this PIP. We'll see you next time. Take it easy, guys.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@the d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.